To federal politics. Joining me is the Manager of Opposition Business and the Opposition Industrial Relations spokesman, Tony Burke. Thanks for your time. Let's start with your plans or the proposal when it comes to gig workers, the gig economy, Uber drivers and so on. What have you got planned on that front? We see some policy information gradually being released. What are your plans, your thinking on that?
Yeah, look, the first thing is, Kieran, we need to establish what cannot be allowed to go on. And it's this. We cannot have a situation in Australia where some people are working below the minimum wage. We can't have a situation in Australia where we set a legal minimum and then for a whole lot of people in the gig economy, we say, oh, but you don't count. And what's the reason the platforms say they don't count? They say, oh, no, but they're not employees, they're independent contractors. Now, I'll tell you, someone driving their own heavy vehicle, they've got a mortgage over it, they employ someone to do the bookkeeping, there is no doubt that they're an independent contractor. But I just don't accept for a minute that the visa worker with a second-hand bike, racing and running traffic lights trying to make ends meet, has that sort of strength, that sort of independence. And the end point is, right now, we have third world working conditions in a first world country. That can't be allowed to go on.
So how do you ensure at least the minimum wage for those individuals?
Well, and we're getting to an announcement.
It's tricky, isn't it?
That's right. And what's happened so far is it's been, are they employees? Are they not employees? How do we deal with this? We're saving a number of announcements for next week. But the principle is this. If you believe in a minimum wage for Australia, then you've got to be willing to apply it. And at the moment, for gig workers, some people will get minimum wage, they'll get enough shifts, they'll get it done, but there are other people who are working for rates of pay that are otherwise unlawful in Australia. But
it's challenging, isn't it? Because they have minimal contact with their employers. Many of these individuals, when you're talking about the autonomy they've got as gig workers, but they don't have the same traditional sort of contact you would have with your boss.
Look, it depends on the job. You think of there's a series of jobs where people will call in for shifts and will get shifts or not. Not every job takes place at a workplace. The real difference here and the way the technology operates, I'll tell you, the technology monitors some of these workers much more closely than any employer normally will. Okay. They'll have GPS tracking, they'll be checking how fast. I've met someone who lost a whole lot of shifts because it was discovered he delivered something by catching a train. He'd travelled at the wrong pace and he'd been GPS tracked. So, let's not pretend these apps aren't watching their workforce closely. They are. They're just pretending that the people working for them are somehow all independent contractors, and they aren't all independent contractors.
We're going to go to Mark McGowan shortly, so I want to ask you about a few other things. Are you encouraged by the poll today? Are you surprised by that? I know you don't like to comment on polls specifically, but it certainly takes a bit of the heat out of that talk around the leader.
I was surprised by the talk. What was published today matches what I've been hearing in the community. And the other thing to remember, we've just had, in 2020, what in political terms was the worst year for oppositions anywhere in the world. The federal opposition here, led by Anthony Albanese, is doing better than any other opposition in the country. And the oppositions that have completely tanked are the ones that decided, to get cut through, they just attack the government no matter what. Look what happened to the Liberal Party in Western Australia or Victoria, and you can see where that recipe ends up. What Anthony's done is made sure that where the government does the right thing, we agree. And where the government hasn't got to the right decision yet, we push them to get there. Without us pushing for it, let's not forget, Scott Morrison was originally against wage subsidies. Today he's boasting about the importance of JobKeeper. When we told him to do it at first, he said it was very dangerous.
Is this we've got the industrial relations discussion today. Will we see more, meat on the bone, so to speak, to say, because one of the criticisms of Labor and Mr Albanese has been there's been no policy, no direction, or as Bill Shorten described it, a tiny agenda.
Yeah, well, Bill said that the reference wasn't exactly as you described it in terms of what he meant, but the The real issue here is the first policy that we announced is huge, and that's a childcare one. It is appalling that anyone gets punished for wanting to work the fourth or fifth day. The concept now that we have people that if you work the fourth or fifth day of a week, you lose money because of how the childcare system operates is something that obviously needs to be fixed. But with the industrial relations agenda, you look at what the Morrison government's proposed already, what's before the Parliament now, what we'll start announcing and what I've already spoken to you about gig workers. Here's the difference it makes. It determines this policy area, what is it like on the other side of the pandemic. When you go through a period of huge unemployment and you start coming out of the hole the other side, do you have Australians in secure jobs or insecure jobs? Scott Morrison has a view that, they're all the same. I'll tell you what, it's not the same if you're trying to get a mortgage. It's not the same if you're trying to make ends meet. Bills are regular. Income needs to be able to match that.
Hence this new mantra for, this line that Labor's saying, we're on your side. Is that basically because you feel there's a disconnect now or a widening inequality worsened by the pandemic? Is that essentially why you're prosecuting that line?
Oh, and it's even worse than that. Yeah, it's even worse than that. The people who feel betrayed are the people who were being told at the end of last year they were the heroes of the pandemic. Yeah, think of the term frontline workers. If you use that on Sky News as a term 10 years ago, you would have meant police, nurses, people in uniform. But after the pandemic, we're talking about cleaners, we're talking about shop assistants, we're talking about transport workers, we're talking about delivery drivers, we're talking about Australia Post. Now when we talk about frontline workers, it's a completely different definition. It's much broader because we realise what it is that we rely on to make Australia work. Now, those people are the same people who are going to be at risk of a pay cut if Scott Morrison goes ahead with legislation that's before the Parliament right now.
Yeah, so we've seen this advertising from the unions, a bus heading towards some workers. What do you make of that sort of quite graphic ads that we're seeing from the
I hear you, and there's a really specific reason why I'm not going to comment on it. And it's because the government today is desperately trying to make the story about an ad. You've got a real issue out there. People who are going to have a cut to their take-home pay. People who are the heroes of the pandemic potentially facing pay cuts of $6,000, $12,000 a year for an aged care worker. And you think what they've been through in the last year. Now, I'm not surprised that the government doesn't want to talk about that and they want to go off to an ad. I'm not surprised for Mr Morrison's government that the thing they are most passionate about is the advertising and marketing of an issue. But can I tell you, this pay cut is real. The cuts to job security that Mr Morrison's government is currently pursuing are real, and we'll keep the fight exactly there.
Do you see a situation, though, where the government will simply compromise and won't put itself in a position where it's facing another work choices, potentially, and they will make amendments to that omnibus bill?
Well, they've already
indicated they're open to it.
Yeah,
so
but they've also made
these campaigns will fall over before they begin.
They've just had 2 months. They've had 2 months to withdraw the legislation. They've had 2 months to say that they're not going to go ahead with it. They've had 2 months where Australian workers, after going through the toughest year of their working life, are being told they're threatened with cuts to job security and cuts to pay. And what's Mr Morrison's government done during that time? Left the bill completely as it is. Sure, if they can't get through the Parliament, it won't happen, but that'll only be because we've stopped them. And what they have revealed now that they can't walk away from is what sort of Australia they want. And it's one with cuts to pay and cuts to job security. Just
before I let you go, we'll finish where we began a bit earlier. We discussed it a bit earlier with Anthony Albanese and his leadership. Often in this place, once it starts simmering, it's hard to put a lid back on it. Are you comfortable, given you said you were surprised by the talk in the first place, that he's safe and secure in that position?
We're in the hunt. Anthony Albanese will take us to the election and beyond. And can I say, the more I see how arrogant and confident Mr Morrison is, the more I'm reminded of the Howard government in its final term.
Tony Burke, we'll talk to you soon.
Great to be back.